Okay, good. We're rolling here. Welcome everybody. We are glad to have everyone joining us. I know it's Friday afternoon. I know there are other things going on, but I'm glad that you're here and thinking a little bit about optional practical training. Just briefly, I know a number of you I sent an email out to. I hope it wasn't too alarmist or things like that. But I'll give you just a quick backstory is processing times for optional practical training can take a bit if you're not familiar with that. And I think it was about 2 or 3 years ago, we had one student who actually lost an opportunity with an employer because it was taking quite a while to get that processed. And that student wished that they would have started the process earlier. I think for some students, they think that optional practical training can be processed as quickly as curricular practical training, which I'm not the expert on, but from my experience, that's not the case. So OPT usually is processed outside of L1. So part of the reason that we're doing this session now is to encourage you all to be thinking about OPT, getting your application in and submitted so that you don't run into a problem like that other student who kind of made me promise like, hey, help other students learn from my negative experience of losing an opportunity because OPT processing took so long. So I'm glad that you all are here. And we're recording this too, so we'll make that available afterwards. I'll follow up with you all, and Annette, you sent me a note asking me to take attendance. I'll make sure I'm taking note of who's here so I can send that to you. But yeah, so very glad to have Annette and Jillian here from ISSS. So I'll turn it over to them.
Hi there. Let me apologize in advance. I'm in the office today, so I'm masked. Probably could take it off, but I'm not 100% sure about the ventilation in this part of the building, so I'm going to leave it on if you don't mind. So that means you can't see my smile, but I'm smiling. We are going to go ahead and talk about OPT. This is fairly informal. If you have a question, go ahead and either do the raise hand and unmute yourself or type it in the chat. And we'll take the question. If it's something that we will cover a little bit later on in the session, I might ask you to hold on to it until we get to that part. And Jillian, if you can help me keep an eye on the chat and any questions that I might miss, that would be super. Okay, let me share my screen. And let me find my mouse. With my laptop open, I have 3 screens, so the 2 were not enough. Okay. All right, everybody should be able to see that. Can you see that now? Wonderful. All right. So we are going to, and I'm not looking at you, but I'm looking at the screen. We're going to go through talking about what OPT is, how the benefit works, and some of the current immigration climate implications. Now, I will say that this is shifting. It appears to be shifting in a positive direction, which is wonderful. But we'll still talk about some of the things that are ongoing right now. Making a plan for your OPT timeline, which is going to be very specific to you, where you are with your job search. Do you have travel plans? Do you have a job offer already? So we'll talk about those pieces. And then requesting the OPT, and this is, the application piece has 2 components to it because you're filing an application with United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. However, it requires a recommendation from the school that has your CVIS record. So we have to issue an OPT recommendation, which is your OPT I-20. So you're requesting that from Vanderbilt ISSS. And then once you have that, you file your application with USCIS. So there's 2 parts to that. We'll go over those pieces. And then the big issue or the big ticket item is maintaining your status once you have OPT. So we'll talk about how you use OPT and how you keep your status in good shape while you're on post-completion OPT. Okay, so what is it? Who can use it? It is a benefit of your F1 status, so you do have to be an F1 student, and it's an application that you're filing with the Department of Homeland Security with the benefits branch. So that's USCIS, or United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. It's an extension of your F1 status. So you're not changing to a different status category. You're not, filing for a change of status or any of that. It's a continuation of your F1 status, but it's your status continuing beyond the end of your academic program. And it is a work authorization benefit. So it gives you 12 months of temporary work permission per higher educational level, which means that you can repeat OPT, but you have to get a higher level than you were the last time you used it, a higher degree level. And it only gives you permission to do work that is directly related to your major field of study. So if you've been in the US and you've done OPT before, or rather, sorry, you've done a degree in the United States before, you can't use OPT from your MBA to work in a field that you previously studied. It has to be related to the current degree that you're working on. And then the employment that you do with the OPT, it should be equal to the level of education that you're completing. So practical application of that, you wouldn't want to look for, ideally, you would not be looking at jobs that don't at least require some level of a higher degree or prefer the degree that you have. All right, so eligibility, again, you've got to be an F1 student and an F1 student in good standing. That means that you've maintained your F1 status, so you've been making normal progress, your I-20 is not expired and you're still a student. You've not worked without authorization, your passport is valid, all of those good things. And you had to have been enrolled full-time for at least an academic year. Now, COVID has sort of messed up everything, but it does include periods of time where the Department of Homeland Security recognized F1 status during online or hybrid enrollment. So if you were an in-person student in spring 2020 and you completed that semester virtually because of COVID and the university closure, and then you maybe were remote for fall 2020 and you might even be remote now, that's all okay because it's allowed under the regulations, under the temporary operating procedures that DHS has authorized for COVID. If you are a brand new student and you started your program in fall of 2020, you would have needed to have been in person for fall 2020. Current rules allow you to be remote this semester if you are not an initial student and this is your first semester in the US. So under those circumstances, you're still meeting those requirements. And let me just pause and ask, does that make sense the way I've explained that? Or did I mess that up? Okay. I don't see, it looks like that makes sense. Okay. And then you need to be coming up on degree completion. That means that you're in your last semester and you are expecting to finish. Okay. If there's anything outstanding that you have to complete in order to graduate, you do want to consider the timing of your application, if there's any chance that you might need to continue enrollment. If you apply for OPT and then don't finish your program, that causes an issue with your F1 status because you've then gotten to the end of the time on your I-20, but you haven't completed the degree, which then becomes a violation of F1 status. And you run the risk of having both a status issue and an eligibility for OPT issue. All right. So when we look at eligibility, there's also a time component to this. So your application has to be timely filed. And this means that it's been received within the USCIS filing window. So there is a legal period of time where they can accept your application. And it's been received while the OPT recommendation that you've gotten from us is still valid. When we issue that OPT I-20, it's only valid for 30 days. So you want to make sure that USCIS receives your application while that recommendation is still good, and during the time period where they can accept your application. And then for you to be eligible, you have to have not been granted a full year or more of full-time CPT. So as long as your full-time CPT usage has not been at a year or more, then you're still eligible for the OPT. And like I mentioned earlier, you can't have already used OPT at this level or at a higher level. Okay. So there are different categories of OPT. Pre-completion and post-completion are drawing from the same 12 months, same time, the same pot of time, so to speak. There are two extensions. One of them is based on your major, and you would have had to be in a STEM classified major that's on the Department of Homeland Security list of STEM majors in order to qualify. And the other is a CAP-GAP extension that's available to folks who've been hired by an industry employer and are being sponsored for an H-1B visa. Any STEM folks on? So I know if we need to talk through that today, or if we can redeem a little time by skipping that.
We do have some STEM folks on. I know we've got some Masters of Finance students, and we've got two of the ON MBA concentrations are STEM certified. So yes.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. So we will talk about that. Okay. All right, so what's changed? How does it affect you? You've probably noticed if you've been, if you've got a heartbeat, you've probably noticed that there have been some interesting changes in the immigration world over the last 18 months in particular, but really over the last few years. And the trend of all of those changes, there's been an increase in federal agency oversight and enforcement. There have been several internal agency changes with regards to their own policies and processes, and there have been several fluctuations with USCIS processing times. So the takeaway or the practical application of this, and actually before I move to that, this is still a developing something. So we're still watching this. Things are changing. You know that there's been an administration changeover in Washington, and over time I think we'll continue to see changes in how the mission of several federal agencies is administered and carried out. So we may continue to see additional changes, and it's too early to say if those changes will be, sort of a net positive gain or negative. It really could go either way whenever you have a new administration coming in. But one thing is certain, that we probably will see changes. So the focus now for students who are applying for post-completion OPT, it's extremely important that you understand how to maintain your F1 status, and that you manage the things that are within your control. And the primary reason for that is if you have a status issue, so if you fall out of good status while you're on post-completion OPT, there really isn't a way to fix the status and preserve the work permission. Because the primary methods for doing that both require you to either be full-time enrolled or to be planning to be full-time enrolled, and you're now past that phase of your program. So if your application is filed too late, or it's rejected and there's not enough time left to refile, then you have a situation where you're out of status if that happens after the end of your grace period. If you exceed the allowance of unemployment time, which is capped at 90 days, then that is also considered a violation of F1 status. And again, the thing is that it's just really difficult to both fix the status and keep the work permission. The best thing that you can do, again, is managing what's in your control, and that comes down to keeping an eye on and managing your unemployment accumulation, and keeping up with your CVIS reporting. And we'll spend a chunk of time in the session today talking about your CVIS reporting requirements. The other pieces of this, I-765 the application that you're filling in and the USCIS review of that application have gotten a lot more, I don't know, mercurial maybe. So the application itself has gone from 2 pages to 7. It collects a lot more information. USCIS official review has gotten, in the past, there's been a trend towards looking for reasons to deny an application or issues, which hadn't always been the way that adjudication was handled. Going back to about September of 2018, USCIS got rid of the requirement to issue a request for evidence in place of just denying an application if they had a question. So they no longer have to do that. If something is technically wrong with an application and it can be denied, they can deny it and they don't have to ask you for any more information. So the big practical application here, you want to make sure that you understand the form and that you're filling it out correctly. Our goal is to help you with this process, but you want to make sure that you look at the I-765 instructions for yourself as well. So read the instructions, follow those instructions, because we have seen an increase in what we call technical denials, and those are you used an electronic signature instead of an ink signature. You filed it too early, it was received too late, something was missing, that type of thing. There was no signature. You also want to make sure you keep your local address up to date with USCIS when you're filing, because if they do send you communication asking for something, it will usually be time sensitive. And so you want to make sure that you're getting that mail, you're reading it, and you're responding as needed if they're asking for something. Processing times, again, continue to fluctuate. The current issue is a backlog at the front of the process. So receipting has been delayed. A process that normally takes about 2 weeks has been taking 6 to 8 weeks. And that developed somewhere around late October to mid-November. We're not really sure what the reason is for the delay. The best thing that you can do to manage this is to apply as early as you can within your filing window. Give yourself the best chance of getting your OPT approval by the time that you want to begin working. And we'll spend some time talking about processing windows and all of that. Any questions on that piece before I move on? Okay. Oh.
I have a quick question. Let's say, as far as the timing of application, I think for ours is we're graduating in May 14th, so I think we can apply as early as Feb 13. Let's say we are we allowed to, let's say, start sending it by Feb 8 and have it just so it will arrive at the USCIS by Feb 13, or do we need to send it exactly on Feb 13 itself?
Yeah. So. I am always a little nervous around dates with USCIS, so I would not send it early just because of the chance that, the post office decides to be efficient that day and it gets there ahead of time. If you're aiming for a specific date of delivery, then your best bet would be to either use express mail through the post office or use a courier. So that you know exactly what date it's going to arrive. Because if it does arrive too early, they will say, thank you very much. They will take your money, put your application into the queue. When it gets to a USCIS official, they'll deny it because it got there outside of the timeline. So you want to be careful about that.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask a question as well?
Yeah.
So saying if I'm applying an OPT, does that mean I'll still keep my status in the current program after the supposed graduation date?
And when you say keep your status, you mean would you still be in F1 in the F1 status category, or do you mean something different?
The F1 status category.
Yep, you will still be in an F1 non-immigrant classification. So it's just extending your status beyond the end of your program, but it doesn't move you to a different status.
And also, does it affect my graduation?
I'm not 100% sure I'm clear on what you mean there. So because it's a post-completion benefit, you would need to have finished all of your degree requirements before you begin using the OPT.
Okay, thank you.
Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, all right. And, all right, so this is neither here nor there, but I feel like a Muppet talking through this task. And for those of you who may not know who the Muppets are, Google them. Okay, all right, so when can you apply? So this comes down to your timeline and your filing window, and all of your OPT deadlines are determined by your program end date. And so it then comes down to a simple math calculation. What's your program end date? Your filing window opens 90 days before the program end date on your OPT I-20, and it closes at the end of your 60-day grace period, which is 60 days after the program end date on your OPT I-20. And this window is established in the regulations as the legal period when you can file and when USCIS can accept your application. Your grace period, every F1 student has a grace period, and this is the 60 days immediately following completion of your program. So it's the 60 days right after the end date on your I-20. And then you're limited, oh, sorry, one more thing to note about the grace period. This is also the date range that you have to use when selecting your OPT.
This is Bailey.
Sorry.
Bailey,
Oh.
calling. How are you doing? Hey,
Is that me? No. Okay. This is also the start date, the date range that you have to choose from when you're selecting your desired OPT start date. So that's also coming out of that 60 days immediately following your program. You're limited to a maximum of 90 days of unemployment. If you go over 90 days, that's where you have a status issue. If it's within and even up to 90 days, you're still in good status. If you are in a STEM eligible program and you apply for the STEM OPT extension, then you get an additional 60-day allotment of unemployment allowance. And this is added to whatever you have not used. So if you were only unemployed for 5 days during your 12 months of OPT, then you've got 85 days remaining when you go into your STEM period, and then 60 days is added to that. So it does roll over.
But excuse me, about the STEM extension, does it apply to your first year? So technically, technically you'd be unemployed for 150 days.
No, so
year?
yeah, so it doesn't apply to the first year. So that 90-day maximum is for your 12 months of OPT, and at the time that you begin your STEM OPT extension, then you get an additional 60-day allotment that's added to whatever you did not use up during your 12 months. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes sense. Gotcha.
Okay, so your basic process steps for your application, you're going to establish your plan. This is where you look at all of the details that are specific to you. Feel free to make use of ISSS advisors if you need to fine tune or tweak that. You've got questions about how different parts of the OPT timing and process work. Then you're preparing your application materials, which you're going to submit through the ISSS portal. We will process and issue an I-20 that you use to then send your application to USCIS, and then you're waiting for USCIS decision, which would be the approval notice and your employment authorization document or your EAD card. All right, so other things to keep in mind when you're looking at the timeline. So post-completion OPT, because it is a post-completion benefit, it's only available after the completion of your degree program. So that's what I was talking about earlier. If there's anything outstanding, that has to be satisfied in order for you to graduate. So if you have to get a certain grade in a certain class, you have to get a certain GPA, then the timing of your OPT application is important, because if you apply, the OPT is approved, but then you find out that you didn't clear something or you need to repeat something or take another course, then you're already beyond the end of your program and we can't extend your I-20. So that then introduces a status issue. You do also want to keep in mind that because there is that 90-day maximum on unemployment allowance, you want to think about your start dates. So if you've got a job offer in hand and it doesn't begin until September 1st, and you're graduating in the spring, so the latest possible end date you can request is going to be in July, you wouldn't file your OPT asking for a June 1st start date, because you could run through all of your unemployment time. So you do want to consider how much unemployment you might accumulate between when your OPT begins and when your job will begin. There's also a 14-month rule in the regulations that impacts how much OPT you'll actually receive. And the 14-month rule says that your OPT has to begin and end within 14 months of the program end date. Depending on when you file your application and depending on how long USCIS takes to process your application, they may run out of time in that 14-month window, and so they may not be able to give you a full 12 months. So this is what this looks like. The 14 months comes from your 60-day grace period, and then you're eligible for 12 months of post-completion OPT. So that means that your 12 months of OPT has to fit in this 14-month window. So the max possible end date that USCIS can authorize for you if you're graduating this spring is July 12, 2022. So if you were to file your application on July 1st, and let's say that they take a full 3 months and they don't approve it until October, then they can't give you an end date in October. The latest possible end date they can give you is still July 12 of 22. So then in that case, you don't get a full 12 months of OPT. Now, when they're working on your application, if they get to your application on or before the start date that you've requested, they will give you that date as the start of your OPT. If they get to your application after the start date you've requested, then they will give you the date that they approve your application as the start of your OPT. And then if there is a full 12 months left in your window, they will give you 12 months of OPT. If not, they give you the latest maximum end date. Once you file your application, keep in mind that you cannot change the start date that you've asked for. So you do want to consider carefully what start date you're going to choose when you're filing. And if you're graduating at the end of spring, then your start date range is your 60-day grace period, which is the earliest start date you can request is May 15. The latest start date you can request is July 13. Okay, and let me check something here because okay, I just noticed I have two competing dates here. Filing window opens on 2/13 and 2/11. So I'll need to double check that and I'll confirm. Okay, does this make sense the way I've explained it? Any questions on this?
Yeah, Annette, this is Chidi. Can you say what you said one more time, like the earliest start date? I'm not sure I got that clearly. The earliest and the latest start date.
Oh, sure. So when you're turning your application into us, you're going to tell us what OPT start date you want us to recommend for you. And that has to come from your grace period. So this range here, your 60-day grace period, is also your date range that you can choose from for your OPT requested start date. So May 15 is the earliest start date you can request. July 13 is the latest start date you can request.
Okay, great. Because I know my start date for work is on the 12th of July. So that's why I was just asking. I'm hoping that I fall into that category. Because I was actually thinking of bringing it a little bit forward. sometime earlier in July, but it's still subject to conversation with my employer. But I just wanted to be clear.
Gotcha.
Thank you.
Another question on that, if I can. If we don't know our start date, like we don't have an offer, and we, for example, choose June 15th as our start date, and when we finally get the offer, it actually starts, I don't know, June 30th. Is that a problem?
So once you've filed, keep in mind that you can't change it. So, way back, we used to have good liaison communications and we could work out changing a requested start date, but it's not that way anymore. So if your application is approved as requested, then your EAD card would be issued with June 15, and you'd have to, actually, let me back up. Did you say you'd ask for June 15 and your start date isn't until June 30?
Yeah, something like that. So
Gotcha.
a disconnect.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So in that case, you can't move it. You can't move your start date. So then if you don't have a job to begin on June 15, that's your first day of unemployment if your OPT is approved by then. And you'd be accumulating about 2 weeks of unemployment time, depending on when you start working.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
One final question, please.
Yeah.
So I plan to move my start date to sometime in June rather than July. And I know if I have to file right now, I might possibly put July because it's still, like I said, it's still subject to my employer. What do I do in that situation when it finally gets approved for June?
Yeah, so this is where you'd want to make an educated guess, and in some ways a little bit of a gamble. If you know that you want to file early, then you have to decide on a start date that you're going to request. And once you get your application into the queue, there won't be a way to change it. So you would have to decide what start date you're comfortable requesting. Now, that may mean that you recalibrate a little bit what you're negotiating with the employer. But at this point, so if you're trying to get your application in February, you'd have to decide if you want to file that asking for a June 30 start or a July 1 or some other date.
Thank you.
Quick question on this timeline. I was looking at 514, let's say this 5/14/2021. 90 days before that is 2/13. Just wondering if there's another way that you're calculating the 2/11/21.
No, yeah, that's a typo, and I just have to confirm which of these dates is the typo. I believe 2/13 is correct, and the 2/11 is one that I have to update.
Okay.
But I'll double check that and then confirm.
Yep.
I have a quick question about unemployment days limit. How does that counted? Like, is it kind of like weekdays, like calendar days, like?
Yeah. So hold on to that one because we got a whole section on unemployment, which I think is next. So put a pin in that for just a moment. We'll come right back to it. All right. Any other questions on timeline?
So for the start of the following window, does it mean the time we can mail our application?
So it means when they actually can receive your application. So if it arrives at USCIS outside of your filing window, they'll still take it, but they won't be able to approve it when it gets to a USCIS official. They would have to deny it.
Oh, okay. So it's better to maybe like mail it after the filing window date.
It depends on how you're sending it. If you're using FedEx and you're going to send it overnight, then you send it on the, I don't know what day of the week this is, but if this is a weekday, you would send it the day before. It'll get there the next day. So it'll depend on what kind of mailing service you're using.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Anybody doing the Mod 3 completion? Or is everybody using the standard dates? All right, so I'm just going to gloss over this quickly. These are the dates if you are doing the Mod 3 early completion. Everything is shifted up. Remember that the timeline is based on your program end date. So then that determines how early you can file, what's the last day you can file, what start date range you can use, and the maximum possible end for your OPT. Once your OPT finishes, you have a 60-day grace period. If you are eligible for any of the extensions, keep in mind that for the STEM extension, the filing window is different. The grace period is not a part of your filing window. So we'll talk about that in a little more detail when we get to the extensions. Okay, and I'm gonna gloss through that. Okay, so employment, what kind of work can you choose? Remember that you are choosing the employment. It has to be appropriate, and the guideline for that is it has to be directly related to your major field of study. It should also be equal with the level of education. Every job, any job that you do while you're on post-completion OPT has to meet that standard. So if in your private life you're an awesome DJ and you want to take up a job on the weekends, building your DJ cred, you can't do that with your OPT because you weren't here to learn how to be a DJ, so you can't use your OPT for that. When you're on OPT, you will have to report the relevance of your employment. So you'll have to report how is your job related to what you studied. And there are some specific requirements that statement has to meet. We'll look at that when we look at your OPT reporting, but you're going to have to make that connection. So I always say that you're in the best situation when you can make a concise, logical connection between what you're doing and what you studied. The more difficult it gets to connect those two, then you run into some risk of being able to defend the OPT if you're ever asked to by Department of Homeland Security, or depends on how you're using it. You have to be, there are two ways to think about being considered employed while you're on post-completion OPT. One of them is based in the regulations and the other is based on policy guidance. Both of them are valid, both of them are recognized and accepted. However, if a federal agency wants to change the regulations, they have to go through the prescribed process for doing that, and part of that process requires them to make advance public notice. So they have to tell the public they're changing something. For policy guidance, the only process they have to follow is that internal agency's own process for updating a policy memo. And that does not often, usually it does not require, and typically there is no advance public notice for that. So that means that the rules could change overnight and you wouldn't have much notice that things are going to be different. So the regulations, as per the regulations, if you're employed full-time in a paid position that's directly related to your field of study, you're considered employed for the purposes of OPT. By policy guidance, if you're working at least 20 hours per week in a paid or unpaid position, then you're considered employed for the purposes of OPT. In both cases, in all cases, the work has to be directly related to your major field of study. You can work as much as you want, but if you're not working at least 20 hours, you can't be considered employed. So that means that you're working, but you're still earning unemployment days because you're not employed enough, if that makes sense. You can work for multiple employers. You can do short-term work. You can do consultancy. You can do a startup. All of that counts as employment while you're on post-completion OPT. You do want to be careful about labor laws because if you're considering an unpaid position, because the guidance, while it allows unpaid work, it says that the unpaid work cannot violate federal labor law. So our recommendation, if you are considering unpaid work as a means of managing your unemployment, that you want to be sure to request a letter upfront from the employer that confirms that they're offering you an unpaid position for X amount of hours per week, and also come up with a method for tracking your time. Because if DHS wants to wants to ask you for proof that you have not exceeded unemployment. They're going to ask you for records from the employer. And if your employer is uneasy about documenting that, then you're in a situation where you can't prove that you've been maintaining your status. You can work, a couple other things to keep in mind with unpaid work. You really can't be unpaid when you should be paid. So if you're sitting next to Bob, you and Bob are doing the same job, Bob takes home a paycheck at the end of the month and you don't, that's a problem with labor law because you're doing a job that has been classified as something the employer pays for. If you're considering doing unpaid work at Vanderbilt, keep in mind that's going to depend on your department and whether they're set up to offer you an unpaid position. So you might need to work on that in advance if that's your backup plan. Okay. Other things to keep in mind, as of the end date on your OPT I-20, that is also the end of your on-campus employment. So if you are working on campus, you're graduating on May 14, and you did not do the Mod 3 completion, then May 14 is the last day that you can work on campus, and then all work stops until your OPT has been approved and your EAD has arrived, and the start date that's printed on it has also arrived. Okay. If you're planning to work at Vanderbilt while you're on post-completion OPT, keep in mind that it cannot be a student position. So it has to be a staff or professional position. Can't require you to still have active student standing or be an enrolled student. All right. The unemployment limitation, so like we've talked about, you're capped at 90 days maximum of unemployment during your 12 months of OPT. You want to keep in mind that it isn't that you have 90 days to find a job or 90 days to start working. It's that you cannot exceed, you can't be unemployed more than 90 days during your entire 12 months of OPT. So you want to have some way for keeping track of how much unemployment you're using. And how it's counted when your OPT is valid. So while your application is pending, you're not accumulating any unemployment time. So once your application has been approved and the start date that's printed on your EAD card has arrived, that's your first day of unemployment, and that clock continues to count calendar days until you start working. So having a job offer won't be enough to stop the clock, or, you know, like I mentioned before, you're working, but maybe it's only 12 hours a week. That's not enough to stop the clock. You have to be employed and starting work in order to stop the unemployment time from accumulating. And so because it's calendar days, weekends, holidays, time spent outside of the U.S., all of that counts as unemployment if you are not employed or not attached to an employer. Because going over the unemployment allowance is considered a status violation, a couple of things to keep in mind. Like we talked about earlier, it is really difficult to repair F1 status while you're on post-completion OPT and keep the work permission. So you want to be careful about that. Remember that while your focus is being employed, the way that you maintain continued access to work is by keeping up with your CVIS reporting. It's very important that you do that. Also keep in mind that our role is reporting. So once you report to us, we report what you've reported. Enforcement of the rules and determination that there's been a status violation, that falls to the Department of Homeland Security. Couple of things to note there. If they do determine that a status violation has happened, that can open up some other legal complications. So in general, the best case scenario is to avoid a status violation. DHS has been doing more monitoring and follow-up on OPT reporting and follow-up with students on post-completion OPT. Remember that your CVIS record counts days of unemployment once your OPT has been approved. So the reporting is just really important. As long as your CVIS record is valid, we will continue to report what you report to us, but if your reporting is late, we can't guarantee that there won't be any follow-up from the Department of Homeland Security. Okay, so managing it, you just want to think about it in the right way. We've talked about that it's a cumulative maximum. It's not an extension of the grace period. And have a backup plan. So whether your backup plan is also looking at part-time work or looking at unpaid positions, or maybe your backup plan is going back to school. You know, you want to think about the timing of those things, especially if you're planning to go back to being a student. You want to make sure that you can have the I-20 in hand early enough. So thinking about application deadlines, admission timelines, and whatnot. If you're also looking at work outside of the United States and you're considering what we would call forfeiting the OPT, so you're considering leaving the US and abandoning whatever OPT you have left, then you want to think about the timing of that. You also want to be sure to report that so that we can go in and close out your record. You know when you're going to put your backup plan into place. Make sure you report your departure, keep records of your departure in case you have to document that or demonstrate that you made a timely departure. Okay, so now we're about to get into the application process. Any questions on all of that before we talk about the how-to? All right. Okay, so you're going to request the application through the portal or request a recommendation through the portal. So this means that you're collecting an online or rather a digital copy of all of your materials so that you can put it in the portal and we can review it and issue your OPT I-20. But remember that you are filing a paper application with USCIS, so you do have to have actual hard copies of those things. You are submitting that through the portal. Because we're still virtual and our space is teeny tiny, so we can't have folks in here and adequately social distance right now, we're doing an initial OPT review. So you would schedule that on our scheduling page. We go over your materials, let you know if there are any big issues that need to be resolved before you submit it for processing. You submit your application, we process, and then you'll sign up for an OPT final review, which is after you've made all of your edits, you've got your OPT I-20, you've got all of your final documents, we take a look at that with you, and then you are sending your application off to USCIS. We do recommend that you take a copy or a scan of your application, your final set of materials before you send it, so that you know what you sent in case they do ask you for a copy. And then you're waiting for processing. When you send your application, it's very important how you send it because it has to arrive on time, has to also arrive while your OPT recommendation is valid. So we don't recommend that you sit on the application at all while you're waiting. You also want to make sure that you send it in a way where you can track how it was sent and when it arrived. If you're going to use the post office, only use express mail because that's the only option that will guarantee delivery within a certain time window. Okay, so I'm going to pause the slides for a moment and go over to the internet.
Hi, Annette. Annette,
Hi
I have a question. Just wanted to clarify. So you said your office takes 5 to 7 days to process the recommendation. So does it mean that for those of us looking at May completion, we can theoretically make a request today, looking at the timeline?
Yeah, so if you get your application, well, so your timeline would be just a little bit, because once you get everything, you want to schedule an OPT review. So if there are time slots or slots left for you to book that on Monday, then theoretically you could have an initial review on Monday, submit your application on Monday, and get it in the queue.
All right, thank you.
Hey, Annette.
Hey.
I have a scheduled initial OPT review. Do you think I can schedule the final one just for time sensitivity, or I need to wait for that first initial before I could schedule the final?
You should probably wait. You can always release an appointment if you end up not needing it, but it'd be best to book that once you get the email that says your OPTI 20 is ready, book your final review.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, so when you log into the portal, you're on your homepage. The easiest way to get there is to go to Search Online Requests, and then from there you're going to Employment Authorizations, Optional Practical Training. The system will only let you have one application per term, so there's usually only one available at a time. Because I have one in the system already, it's giving me this lovely reminder message and taking me to the application I've already started. Your to-do panel is over here on the left, and that tells you everything that you need to do to submit the application. And your to-do boxes are here on the right. You want to start with the checklist that gives you the list of all of the items that you have to pull together. Then you're going to read through and digitally sign the documents. The OPT reporting requirements goes over in great detail what your responsibilities are for reporting. And then you retain access to these once you're on OPT, so you can always come back to this and read it. You fill it in the questionnaire, and here in the questionnaire, this is where you tell us what you are requesting. So we ask about your previous CPT usage, previous OPT. We ask if you have any travel plans, and we'll talk about travel in a moment. And then employment, so here you're telling us in 5, 6, and 7 that you're asking for post-completion OPT, and then you tell us what start date and what end date you're requesting. You also have to do a recommendation request, and this you are sending to someone in your school who can confirm your anticipated completion. So if they are a Vanderbilt person, you can search for them in the directory lookup, and then you'll get a page like this where you can enter information to the person to let them know what it is that you're asking for.
And Annette, I'll hop in on this.
Yes, I was looking for your face. I was like,
I can speak to. I know some. Well, I'll start, and then maybe Jerry, if you want to say anything, hop in on this too. But I'll say for first-year MBAs, or really anybody who's completing curricular practical training, first off, we've got a session that we're doing with Annette and Jillian in, I can't remember the exact date, but it's in March. So for especially first-year MBAs on this, you'll want to think about that. And I'm the person that is the recommender for CPT, for curricular practical training. For OPT, it is in the student programs office. And Jerry, is that you this year?
Yes, that's.
Am I putting you on the spot?
That's okay. I'm sorry. I'm trying to do several things at once. That would be me. So what happens is maybe Annette and Brooke give their perspectives as well. But what happens is you go into your portal and you fill out a couple of questions around it. And once that happens, then if it's OPT, I get the email and I have to fill out certain things to verify. If it's CPT, Brooke gets it. So it's important that you kind of pay attention to who's supposed to get one, because it can delay us getting moving right into the portal. But if that happens, it's okay. We'll solve it as soon as we can. But I'm the OPT person, and I'm generally verifying that it's right and that they have the credit for the graduate.
Is that the same for MSFs as well? Because I think I've already got my OPT academic confirmation from Sherry.
Maybe it's, Annette, are you there?
yeah, sorry. Were you asking me something? I'm sorry.
So does it go to other people in the building for the one-year programs?
Say that first part again. I didn't hear all of it.
So I, as the academic office for the building, I didn't realize that, I didn't realize, which program are you from? whoever that was that just said that? Your MSF.
MSF, yep.
That Sherry Wilkerson does some of those?
Because
Okay.
it says here that your academic advisor must confirm. So I just sent an email to Sherry like a week ago, and he was, I think I already got it. I just wanted to make sure that Sherry is the right person, or would it be Jerry as well?
Yeah, because do I understand correctly? You're actually, Sherry can, Jonathan, I mean, Sherry would kind of look at your record and she generally anecdotally would know, but we're the office that would officially say, from an OA standpoint, he has accomplished his credits.
Jerry, I'm sorry, like I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Okay, sorry, can everybody hear me okay?
Jerry, it has cut out a little bit too. Maybe we can try again, and then if Jerry, if we don't hear what you're saying, we can either I can send an email to everybody who's attending if we can't hear you.
Okay, sorry about that. I've got people calling me as well at the same time, so I thought that my understanding is it may be okay for someone else if it's happened, but our office is the verifier of what credits have been accomplished for the school. So it makes sense, Jonathan, why you would have thought Sherry, because it does say your advisor. Is it possible to change that language at all?
Yeah, we could look at that. Now, the one thing to keep in mind, if somebody has already submitted an application, the refresh won't push through to theirs. But anybody who has a pending application that they haven't submitted, it would refresh on their application.
And probably it's fine. I mean, Sherry's going to know you're in a lockstep program. She knows what coursework you've completed. She can look at that. But ongoing, Annette, do you see any problem with another, like an academic advisor having a that versus their office?
Not a problem necessarily, but what I would say, Jonathan, is to just go back in and send another recommendation to Jerry so that you have it from the office that confirms completion. And as long as, and that won't slow your application down, but that would be the best thing to do.
Okay, perfect. Just send another request for Jerry as well. So I'd have Jerry and Sherry on file.
Yep.
Perfect. All right, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. All right. Let me find my mouse. Okay. So, and then attached documents. This is where you're going to upload all of your application materials, which are here. Depending on your previous use of OPT and whether you've had a CVIS ID before, you may not have all of these things to upload, but you would upload them in attached documents. When we look at the checklist, so these are all of your materials. 1 and 2 are built in. So you're pretty much going to start with number 3. Right now, the fee is $410. There was a fee increase scheduled for October 2nd that did not go into place because it was halted by a judge's order. So what you want to do, there's a link here in the 3rd bullet that will take you to the I-765 page, and you want to make sure that you confirm the fee before you write that check and then before you file your application. So any updates they will have on this page, and this September 29 update is still about the fee, the injunction that prevented the fee increase. If you scroll down a bit, you'll see the details of the form. So this is where you can always check the filing fee, which edition of the form they're accepting, and instructions on where to file. On your check, if you're writing a check, you want to make sure you make it payable to U.S. Department of Homeland Security, and then we'll go over some additional items on the check that you want to keep in mind before filing. You'll need 2 passport-style photos that meet the Department of State passport photo requirements. On the back of these photos, you want to write your I-94 number and your full name. Then you're going to fill in the 2 USCIS forms, get them directly from the USCIS site so you have the most current version. And then your most recent I-94, we do recommend that you pull that fresh just to make sure you're providing the correct one. Your passport bio page, your visa stamp, your F1 visa stamp. If you are Canadian or Bermudan, you won't have a visa stamp, so then you want to provide a copy of the most recent F1 entry stamp from your passport along with your I-94. 10 and 11 you get from us, so we will provide a copy of your signed OPT I-20. We will also provide a printout of the CPT information from your CVIS record. If you have used CPT or OPT at another level or other school, if you have had a CVIS ID before that's different from the one you have now, then you'll provide these things as well. So if you've had OPT or CPT, then those I-20s and that EAD card. And if you've had a different CVIS ID, then you'd provide a copy of that I-20 as well for documentation of that ID. Note that right now, all OPT applications are being sent to the Chicago lockbox, which is different than our normal filing location. And this is in part to manage that backlog of receipting that USCIS is working through. So I would recommend, because this is a temporary thing, that you also check before filing to make sure that you're filing in the right place. If you come to this page and you see this January 8th update, then that's still in place, but you can follow the link for to see the exact space of where you file. On this page, you would look at foreign students and they tell you where to go. So for C3, this is all of C3, it's telling you to send it to the Chicago lockbox. Okay. And I'm going to stop the share and go back to the slides.
Annette, sorry, one
Yeah.
more question.
Sure.
Is there a preference to electronically fill out the application or handwritten it?
Yes, actually, we're going to talk about that. So hold on to that. The short answer, if you can type it, that's best. You don't want to, because they pull everything off electronically, so you don't want to increase the chances of unforced error, so to speak. So for the application fee, a couple things to note. Use an accepted form of payment. They will accept check, personal check, banker's check, money order, and credit card. Do be careful with the credit card. Because of the way they process it, there is a little bit of elevated risk that you could end up with an application that doesn't have a payment. They don't keep that form with your financial details on it. They destroy it, and so if the payment doesn't go through for any reason, they can't rerun it. So we recommend check or money order. Pay the correct fee. Again, just double check that the fee has not changed when you're ready to file. We're also looking at this. And then if you're writing a check, the name and address of the account holder has to be printed on the check. So you can use starter checks, but you would need to write in your information in that top left corner. You want to make sure that it's dated in a way that is clear, it's not a stale check. Make it payable to U.S. Department of Homeland Security, just like this, no abbreviations, no USDHS, no USDEPT, blah, blah, blah. And then you're putting in the numeric and the alpha representation of the value, right? Your CVIS ID number in the memo. Your signature goes on the front. You don't write anything on the back. That's for the folks who are going to cash the check. If you're using a money order, same thing, made payable to U.S. Department of Homeland Security. The mailing address, you can use the filing address from the checklist there and put your CVIS ID in the memo. For money orders, your name and address also appears on it, and then you want to make sure that you detach the receipt that is attached to it. Keep that because that's your way to follow up with the money order if you need to. Your photos need to be 2 inches by 2 inches square on a white or an off-white background with no border, head and shoulder shot. And it needs to meet Department of State photo requirements. So if you wear glasses, you can't have your glasses on in the photo. And it needs to be, you know, a good photo, high quality pre-cut digital photo, no shadows, and white or off-white background. The G1145 is pretty straightforward. This is just your request for the lockbox to confirm that they have received your application. definitely want to make sure you use your email. You can also add a phone number. For the I-765, you want to make sure you read the instructions, follow those instructions to avoid the elevated risk of a technical denial for an incomplete or something wrong with your application. You also need to submit proof of any previous CVIS IDs, proof of any previous OPT or CPT. So if you've done that at a different school, then your OPT or CPT I-20 would be what you can provide. You want to make sure you're using the correct form version. If you use an outdated form, they will deny the application. So that's where I was talking about on that I-765 page. Check the form edition, and then type your responses in. Don't leave anything blank. If something doesn't apply, you want to enter NA for not applicable or none if it's a numeric field. And you're using your own address to file. So in the mailing address and local address, we'll talk about those in just a moment. Best case scenario, use an address that will not change while your application is pending. That's the cleanest way to make sure you get anything that they send you. Then we have a sample for you to take a look at. The sample is filled out according to the I-765 form instructions. But remember, it's a visual guide only. You want to make sure you're reading the instructions for yourself. On the I-765, oh, I can't get rid of this panel, sorry. There's a panel. The form expiration is up here in the top right, and the form addition will always be down here in the bottom left. So you want to make sure that you're using the correct version. Fill everything in. You're asking for permission to accept employment, so you start with part 1. You don't fill anything in up here. If something doesn't apply, you're marking it not applicable as necessary. On page 2, this is where you give them your mailing address and your physical address. Physical address determines the jurisdiction of where your application is sent for processing. Mailing address is where they send all communication with you. If you're using a friend's address, then in 5A, you would put that person's name, and then you put their address. And here in 6, you would say, no, this is not my address. You provide your address in number 7. If you are using your address, then you do not need to put your name in 5A. You provide your address, and then in number 6, you would say, yes, this is where I live. So then here in 7, these are all not applicable. 8 and 9, oh, yeah.
Quick question. So if we were to update our mailing address, our address for the like a more permanent one, because I live in an apartment right now, do I need to change, does that affect the jurisdiction of the physical address where I would send the application?
So right now, probably not much, but you would still, I would say if your address changes, either your physical address or your mailing address, after you have filed the application, you want to go online and do the address update, so the AR11, so that gets into the system. It does take 10 days for that to make its way to your application, and you would need to have your receipt number to do that.
Okay, so right.
Does that answer your question or not really?
With the USCIS, or that's after the receipt is received?
Sorry, say that again.
Do we have, can we change our address on file with USCIS right now?
So if you haven't filed, you can't do it yet. So then if you have not filed, then it's coming back to your I-765 and you change the addresses that you have there. If you have filed and you have your receipt number and you have an address change, then you do it with USCIS.
Okay, got it. So there's no kind of private records to, as far as our addresses are concerned? No,
it's all based on when they get your application.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Then 8 and 9 here are if you've had OPT before, then it's the USCIS number from your EAD card that you're going to put down. You would only have a USCIS online account number if you've created an online account or you have filed a form using their online system. Then 13, you can apply for a social security number with this application. Everybody has to answer 13A. If you have a social, you're adding it in 13B. And then if you either need a replacement card or you need to apply for a social security number, then you're saying yes on 14, yes on 15, and you're answering 16 and 17. If you do not need a replacement card, you don't need to apply. You're going to say no on 14, and then you don't have to answer 15, and not applicable in 16 and 17. On page 3, this is where you tell them that you're applying for post-completion OPT. So you're filling in all of these pieces with your details from your I-94, your passport. You won't have a travel document, so you don't need to put anything there, just your passport details in 21B. Your CVIS ID number goes here in number 26. And then in number 27, this is where your eligibility code is. So you want to enter it just like you see here, a lowercase c, the number 3, and a capital letter B. The STEM extension question 28 does not apply right now because you can't apply directly for the extension from finishing your program. So these don't apply 28 through 30. On page 4, this is where you provide your phone information. If you only have a cell phone number, you're putting that in both daytime and mobile. On page 5, this is where you sign. Make sure that this is an actual ink signature. Use black ink. Your signature has to fit inside that tiny little box so that it can be pulled off electronically and put on your EAD card. So you want to make sure that that your signature does not cross any of the lines. Use a reasonably fresh date there. So if you practice today, but you're not going to file until April, you don't want to file in April with a February dated form. And then all of the rest of this doesn't apply. As well as page 6, this doesn't apply. When you get to page 7, everyone has to answer 1 and 2. And this is an addendum where you tell them anything else you need to know, they need to know about your application. You would tell them what page number, what application part number, and what question number your statement applies to. And so you find these parts on the application. Page numbers are at the bottom. Part numbers are here wherever you go to a new part of the application. And then the actual item number is the question number. Everyone should make a statement about previous CVIS IDs and previous OPT or CPT. There are several sample statements here. If you have trouble figuring out, or if you need some help figuring out what to put for your situation, definitely talk to one of us. This is also where you would say anything else they need to know. So there's an example here of something else, like let's say your passport has expired, you're renewing it, but you don't have it yet. That's something you would tell them in your application. Any questions on the I-765?
I have a question on like writing none or like NA for the blanks. Is there any special reason? Because like I was trying to like type some none or like whatever the blanks, but it doesn't allow the form doesn't allow me to file like write something on some blanks.
Yeah, and that's classic USCIS where they have requirements or instructions, and then they give you a form that doesn't allow you to follow those instructions. So what you'd want, the easiest thing to do would be to download the PDF from the USCIS website and then use a PDF filler to fill it in. That way you can use the comment tool to type in text where there's no form fields or where the security won't usually let you do it.
Okay.
Can you repeat that again, Annette? Yeah,
so the easiest is to, from the USCIS site, download the form and then use a PDF filler to fill it in. So if you open it here, and I usually type as far as I can get, and then I print it to a PDF, and then I use a PDF filler to fill in the remaining spaces.
Okay. What is the
I actually downloaded the form and kind of filling out the PDF form, and I think file is like kind of very smart. So if I kind of check like, oh, the mailing address is like staying with the physical address, and they don't allow me to like write over it. But like
Yeah.
in this case, like, can I just print it out and maybe write with the pen over it?
You could, but you know, it's best if you typewrite it, but hang on to that, and then I'll take a look, because sometimes, and I don't know if they've updated this recently, but previous versions, there weren't form fields in everything, so and it looks like maybe they may have, yeah, they still did that. So I'll take a look, and then I can circle back to you, but there are ways to use the text tool to fill that in.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh. Okay, I'm not sure who was next, but
Hi, Annette.
hi there.
Yeah, I mean, I have a question on the passport information. So what do you do? Let's say your passport expires and you're trying to get a new one from your passport office and it's not ready.
Okay, well, so in that case, then I would say that's a situation where you want to make a statement. So you've requested it, but it's still pending.
Yeah, that's correct. I'm still waiting
Yeah.
for I mean, even for the capturing and enrollment. So
So then on your application, you put the passport number from the existing passport that you have, and then I would recommend making a note here on page 7 that explains, you know, my passport's expired, I'm waiting for the renewal, I've applied, you know, whatever you need to say there.
okay, thanks. Yeah.
A quick question just to verify on the mailing address. If say I'm moving after graduation, so middle of May, is it easier to just enter a friend's address, which is going to be permanent, instead of having?
Yeah, and just because we don't really know if processing times are going to ameliorate, if you know that you're moving, then, you know, and you know that this is a reliable friend that's going to give you any mail, then I would use a friend's address if you know your address will be changing.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so I'm going to stop did I get everybody?
I think Chitty is next with hand raising. Chitty, did you have a question? Chitty, are you there? I'm not able to hear you. Oh, it looks like his sound may be out. Sorry about that. Or Chitty, if you want to type something, I'll be glad to read it out. Maybe while you're doing that, I see Kelly has a hand up, so we'll go to Kelly, and Chitty, type it in the chat box if you have anything.
Yeah, so I have a very quick question about this type of C3B and C3C. So like the post-completion OPT, the code is C3B, and if I want to do STEM extension, I need to file this again after this period ends, and that's gonna be the code for C3.
Right. So right now you're requesting the 12 months of OPT. So the eligibility code that applies is C3D. When you apply for the STEM, you would use the C3C.
Okay. So even though I'm planning to do STEM extension, like I don't necessarily need to type the employer information, like all the needed for the C3C.
Right. So, right, because number 28 only applies when your eligibility code is C3C.
Okay, thank you.
And Annette, Chitty just typed his question. Yeah. And then maybe we can go to Artem after that. So Chitty's question that he put in the chat was about the signature. Hold on just a second. Can the signature be e-signature? And it looks like Jillian's saying it should be ink.
That's correct.
Great, thank you both.
Yeah, because they'll deny it. If you send it with an electronic signature, they'll deny the application.
Annette, I actually have a question that's come up that I'll throw out there. So I know the application instructions say to sign or to complete the form by typing or in black ink. As far as the signature goes, does black or blue ink matter? That's come up before.
I always err on the side of following what USCIS says. They used to advise blue ink so that they would know it was an original signature, but now the instructions say black ink. So now I have to say I haven't seen one denied because it was blue instead of black, but I think it has more to do with being picked up on their imaging software. So because the instructions say black, I'd use black.
Yeah, so final question. When we submit the needed documents to ISSS, is there an appointment that we have to schedule, or is it does it just get processed?
Yeah, so when you've uploaded all of your documents, but before you submit, you would schedule an OPT initial review. And then when you get the email from the advisor who processed your application that your OPT I-20 is ready, you schedule a final review. And sorry, I skipped a step. Then at your initial review, if there are no corrections, you submit. If you do need to make some edits, then you make those and then submit.
So just submit the additional documents, and submit the form, then schedule the meeting, right?
We usually say not to submit it, but either way, because if you haven't had your initial review and we need to unlock it, you're on with a person that can unlock it for you, so you can go ahead and make those changes. So
Okay. So the initial review is before we submit that form. We just go through it and check it. Okay. And where can I schedule that? Just through the regular scheduling system?
Yeah, that's on our booking page. So you would choose the OPT initial review and schedule.
Gotcha. Thank you.
I just put in the link in the chat for anybody that wants to grab that and save it.
Thank you. Okay.
Annette, I have a question.
Oh, yeah.
On the ISSS website, the initial review for the OPT, do you expect us to schedule the review after we have completed all of the, we have uploaded the documents, we have completed the recommendation letter from the academic advisor and all of that, and we click submit, and after that we do the review, or before we'll do the review?
So the review is most helpful to you if you have filled in all of your materials so that we can take a look at it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right, so, okay, we've talked about does anybody not have a social security number? Or does everybody have one?
No, I don't have one.
Okay, so if you're using the form, if you're applying for the social with the form, keep in mind that the way that process works is once USCIS has approved your application, then they forward your materials for the SSN to the Social Security Administration, and usually that's done within 7 days of the approval of your EAD. They will also send that to the address that was on your I-765. So again, that's why that address is important, that you have a good address there. Okay, so once they receive your application, they will send you a notice of receipt. Check the spelling of your name, check your date of birth. If it's wrong on this form, it'll also be wrong on your EAD card, and that can cause some problems. Right now, receipting is delayed, and we're not really sure when that's going to be corrected. So keep in mind that it's not happening on the normal 2-week timeline right now. You do want to keep looking for you can keep an eye on when the payment is when your check clears, and that'll give you an idea of where things are as well. You can check the status of your case Once you have your receipt number, you can do that on the USCIS page. If you sign up for an account, you can opt in for text or phone update or text or email updates, and that can be helpful. Then while your application is pending, again, you're still in F1 status, but you don't have any work permission. So you can stay in the US, you can also travel. Travel gets a little tricky when we're talking about returning if your application has been approved while you're outside of the country. And then once the end date on your I-20 has arrived, you can't do any employment, paid or unpaid, until you have your OPT approval, your EAD card, and the start date has arrived. Once they approve it, then you'll get the approval notice and your EAD. You want to submit a copy of these as well as with your receipt notice. Go back into your portal, submit a copy. And then you do want to keep an eye on your case status. If USCIS says it's been shipped, but it's been 3 to 5 days, you haven't received it, follow up with the post office. If the post office says it was delivered and you never got it, USCIS will require you to pay the fee again to replace the card. But if you can document that it was lost in the mail, they have waived the fee in that case. Your EAD card and your approval notice usually come separately. EAD looks something like this. They've updated the design from time to time, so this is an older model. Your picture will be there along with a statement that usually worries people, not valid for re-entry to the US. This just means that the EAD card by itself is not an entry document. So if you're going to leave the country and come back, you need to have all of the regular things that we'll talk about in a moment. Your approval notice, if you get this first, it does not have any work permission. So if you get that, you still have to wait for the EAD before you can start working. Okay, so traveling, you can travel while you're on OPT. You can travel while your OPT is pending. But the regulations say in order to return, you have to be coming back to resume work. So if you're coming back after your OPT has been approved. You also want to keep in mind that because you need to have proof of your OPT approval, if once it's been approved and you're re-entering the US, shipping it to yourself from abroad can be tricky, and if it's lost, you have to apply, reapply for the card. So you do want to consider that when you're considering timing of your application and what you're going to do in the interim. You can travel while your OPT is approved, but you do need to have proof of employment when you're coming back. You can technically renew a visa, but that's very complicated right now with COVID and consulate closures and disruption in visa services. And also with the fact that you essentially need to be able to prove that you're planning to come back to your home country, which can be difficult to do while you're on OPT. Okay, so there's a question in the chat about once your OPT application is received and in processing, are you allowed to work on campus? The end of your on-campus employment is going to come down to the end date on your OPT I-20. So if you file your application in February, but you're not finishing until May, you're a May graduate, then May 14th, if you're graduating this semester, that's the last day of on-campus employment. Did that answer? Okay. Okay, so if you are traveling to re-enter, you need to have a valid passport, valid F1 entry visa if you are not from Canada or Bermuda, valid travel signature, which is means that it's been signed within 6 months of the date you're coming back to the U.S. Even if you're not in Nashville anymore, you're still going to do that with us. So you request the travel signature in the portal. We send you an updated I-20. Right now, we're issuing documents electronically, so we would just upload it there. Proof of your OPT approval, which would be your EAD card, and proof of employment, which best case scenario is employment verification, but at least needs to be a job offer letter. And then the maintaining status piece, all of this comes down to your CVIS reporting and managing unemployment. So within 10 calendar days of any change in your legal name, local address, and employment information, you have to make a reporting. and you need to do that with the school that has your SEVIS record. So you want to make sure that you're keeping track of unemployment time and managing that, and that you're keeping your address and employment details up to date. When your OPT is approved, you will get an email from the Department of Homeland Security inviting you to set up your portal account in SEVIS. This lets you do some reporting directly into your SEVIS record. You can change your home address, mailing address, phone number, and some of your employer information. You can also add and delete employers, but you don't want to delete anyone that you have worked for. Remember that reporting your employment changes, you're required to do it with the school that has your SEVIS record. The SEVB portal is optional. So if you use the portal, you want to still report with us. And then when do you have to report? Whenever anything about your employment changes. So if you started part-time and now you're full-time, if you worked for a company and they changed their name, if they move you to a different work location and you're working physically somewhere else, you add a second job, you stop the second job, all of that gets reported. Then when you're reporting relevance, that statement has to include your job title, your employer's name, whether you're working full-time or the average hours per week, a description of your regular duties, and then how those duties are connected to what you studied at in your program at Vanderbilt. While you're on OPT, you can study, but it has to be avocational or recreational. So you can't start a new degree program. And if you do, then you would need to either to get an I-20 from that program. So if it's at Vanderbilt, that means you get a new I-20 from us. If it's somewhere else, that means we're transferring, you request a transfer of your SEVIS record to the new program. And in either case, when you get the new I-20 or when you transfer your SEVIS record, that ends the OPT. So you do want to think about the timing of that if that's something you're considering. Then once your OPT is finished, you have a 60-day grace period. It's just time in F1 status. It does not give you any work permission. And then keep in mind, if you do qualify for the extensions, you want to be aware of the filing deadlines and eligibility triggers for that. So for the STEM extension, cap gap. So if you are employed with an employer who is what we would call a cap subject employer, so they are subject to the government's annual cap on H-1B filings, then if they file for you, you have to still be in good F1 status to take advantage of this. But if you are still on OPT, it extends your work permission. If you are on your grace period, it extends your F1 status only. To qualify, you need to be the beneficiary of a timely filed H-1B petition that's being filed by a CAP subject employer. They are asking for a change of status and a start date of October 1. If they're filing and only asking for the consular notification, so they're asking for the visa and not the status, that does not qualify for the CAP gap extension. If you are the beneficiary of a CAP exempt employer, that does not qualify for the CAP gap extension. Oh, yeah, is there a question? No? Okay. Sorry, I thought I heard someone. So the extension only gives you until September 30 if the H-1B is still pending beyond that date. The employment ends, but you can still wait for the outcome of the petition. If the H is withdrawn, denied, or rejected, then your CAP gap ends and you go into what's remaining of your grace period. You do want to request a new I-20 because that's how you would renew your I-9 and have proof that you received the CAP gap extension. If you have international travel plans, you want to disclose those at the beginning of that H-1B process because travel can complicate an H-1B adjudication. And if your employer filed with a request for consular notification, it is still a good idea to confirm that there have been no changes to your SEVIS record once you get that approval notice. For the STEM extension, remember that this is a separate application, so you're eligible twice per lifetime. It has to be based on a degree that's been done in the United States within the last 10 years. It can be based on a prior degree. You will need to still work with us to get a STEM OPT extension, which would be your STEM OPT I-20, and then you're filing a new application with USCIS. The filing window is different. You can't file it any earlier than 90 days before your OPT ends, and they have to get it by the end date of your current OPT. Eligibility is triggered by the major code that's assigned to the major or the program that you completed at Vanderbilt. You have to also have an offer of employment from an E-verified employer. So someone who's in the E-verify system, it has to at least be 20 hours per week and paid, and it has to be in the same field as the qualifying STEM degree. You're filling in a training plan. That has to be complete before we can issue the I-20. Once you file a timely file complete application, then you're eligible for a temporary 180-day extension of your work permission. That begins the day after your OPT expires, and then you've got additional reporting while you're on the STEM extension. So reporting participation every 6 months, any material changes to the I-983. You do a self-evaluation every 12 months. If you leave an employer, you do a final evaluation, and this is all in addition to the standard 10-day stuff. That's it. Any questions? Anything that we didn't cover? Anything we didn't cover well?
I think there was a slide about the offer during your first year of OPT. Can you go back like a few slides? Like it was something around 43, something like that.
Oh, okay. Thank you, because I didn't know where to go. Traveling? No.
Notice maybe
Do you
travel.
ever...
Next one. During OPT, verification letters. Oh, I mean, okay. Travel signature. Okay. Well, this presentation will be sent to us, right? After.
Yeah. So
okay,
I'm so sorry. But so whatever it is, if you have a question later, feel free to hop on a walk-in or shoot us an email.
I have multiple questions, Annette.
Hello.
Okay, so first question, because I requested the reduced course load, I got a new I-20, but on that I-20, my CPT work authorization is not on it. And I know earlier you mentioned something about previous CPT use, like how do I prove that, or
Yeah, so because your CPT was done here, we would include a printout from your CVIS record of any CPT that was issued, so you don't have to provide a copy of that I-20.
Okay, great. So you would give, when you give me the OPT I-20, you give me the printout of this thing you just mentioned. Is that what you mean? Okay. And then you just mentioned that the STEM eligibility is tied to the major on your I-20. Now, for a lot of us here, the operations and data analytics concentration that's STEM eligible was approved after we had started at Vanderbilt. So a lot of our, at least me on my I-20, the major 1 and major 2 does not have that that concentration. How can I fix that?
Okay, so I'll check on that because it depends on where it is in the order in the student information system as to whether it populates major 1 and 2 in your CVIS record. So, okay, and actually I'll probably circle back to Brooke and Jerry just to get specifics on which majors are STEM eligible, and then I'll double check that for everybody.
Okay, thank you.
There was a change on that since we did this last year, I believe, so that might be complicating. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. I'm glad to know it's not showing up so we can check.
And would you be, like, this is a lot to take in, and when we graduate and are in our first year of OPT, would there be a session like this for STEM OPT, you know, with Annette?
Yeah, so there isn't a session, but you would still do the application in the portal, and then we would still have you do an initial review process. So in that initial review, we would talk through, you know, what you need to do, any changes, but there's a checklist for the STEM OPT as well that has instruction and resources. So that should get you off to a good start, and then you can schedule an initial review to go through any questions.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, I think Joytendra had a question.
Oh, yes. Sorry. Go ahead. My screen is mushed. I can't see all of the all of the hands. Go ahead.
My question is not on OPT, but part-time CPT.
Ah. Oh, okay.
I discussed that question with you on a separate call.
Yes, I remember that now that you're saying that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe we can start after this meeting and discuss that. Jerry, if you can.
Get off of this meeting then, to stop the recording.
Yeah, would I be able to send you an invite for a quick follow-up?
I am okay with that. I'm also okay staying in this meeting and discussing that.
So probably I'll need to schedule one because I have a 3 o'clock with a student, so I may not have time to stay on.
Annette, two quick things. I've got a question, but maybe before other people leave, something I'll mention. I'm gonna actually put this in the chat. In 2 weeks, we're gonna have immigration attorney David Ware speak. It's gonna be remote. If you are interested in more details, please check the link, or please check 1220. It's in the events there. There's a Zoom link where you can join us. But just a reminder, if you're wondering more about, you know, H-1B, permanent residency, that would be a good place for that. So, and then I've got another question here, so I'm gonna read this out. This is adding to Yvonne's question. My immigration attorney equally requested for an updated I-20, which has the new SIP code that shows it qualifies for STEM extension. Just a reminder once you follow up with Annette later. And that sounds like that's probably mostly for me, but yeah, just that's something that we'll be working on.
Okay. Okay, anything else? All right. Well, these are our details of how you can get us on the bat phone and in the bat cave. So feel free to reach out if you have any additional questions, and we'd be happy to talk through any of that with you. I guess that I will stop the share and turn it back over to Brooke.
Great.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you, Annette. Thank you, Jillian. I'm gonna say if you all had dancing chickens, that would have been equally entertaining as the Muppet Show. But we appreciate
and
your.
I kind of have Muppet hair today too. Waka, waka, waka.
I just love the reference. That's a great show. Anyways, yeah, thank you all for joining us. Annette, you're getting a lot of appreciation in the chat and comments. I know a lot of people have been looking forward to this, so thank you for doing this again. And we'll be doing, I mentioned the session with David Ware, and then also Annette will be back and Jillian will be back in March to do that session on CPT for any of you who are, especially in your first year and thinking about that. So I think that's it. I'm going to stop the recording.